Good morning or good afternoon, everyone, depending on where you are, and welcome. Welcome to the Natural Hazards Research Australia online briefing for utilising transformative scenarios in a climate challenged world, expression of interest. My name's Nicola Moore, and I'm the NHRA Node Research Manager for Queensland and the Northern Territory, and I'll be going through some slides with you today. It's an informal session. It's an opportunity for you to ask questions about the project, because today we're joined by two key individuals from the sector, both of whom have played key roles in the development of the existing resources, the application of the existing resources, and the development of this expression of interest for further utilisation of the material. Caitlin Sampson from the Australian Institute for Disaster Resilience, or ADAR, is with us. Caitlin also works for the Australasian Fire and Emergency Services Authority Council, otherwise known as AFAC. And we're also joined by Matt Dyer, who's the Principal Program Officer, Planning, Research and Innovation Unit from Queensland Fire and Emergency Services. I also want to introduce you to a couple of other staff members who are supporting us today. We've got Ethel Salmalka, who's our Research Services Officer, and she's driving Zoom for us today. And we're also joined by Lena Wood, who's our new Communications Officer. So welcome to them as well, and thank you for being part of it. I'd like us all to take a moment to acknowledge the traditional owners and custodians of the lands that each of us are currently situated throughout Australia, and acknowledge their continuing connection to land, waters and community. And we pay our respects to the people, the cultures and the elders, past and present, and recognise that these lands have always been places of teaching, learning and research. And we acknowledge that sovereignty has not been ceded. And the beautiful artwork that you can see on this slide is done by a lady called Leanne Brooke, who was commissioned to do some work for us for our Reconciliation Action Plan. And this piece is called In Our Hands. And you can see the hands reaching out in the middle of that illustration, showing that country is in our hands. We're going to cover a fair bit, but essentially this briefing is also an opportunity for all of you to meet each other, especially if you're looking to potentially work with other researchers on this project and you're looking to put in a collaborative submission. I'd like to encourage you all to take the opportunity to introduce yourselves in the chat and specify your area of expertise. And while you're doing that, I'll also hand over to Caitlin and Matt to briefly introduce themselves as well.
Good morning, my name's Matt Dyer. I work at Queensland Fire and Emergency Services. I have disaster manager experience for about 20 years and a behavioural scientist in my original trade. I work in the strategy, planning, research, innovation area, and climate change is a part of my purview where it links with the Queensland Government policy and increasingly artificial intelligence.
Hi everyone, I'm Caitlin Sampson. I recognise a couple of the names online, so hi to those that I know and to those that I don't. It's lovely to meet you virtually. My role spans across, as Nicola explained, the Australian Institute for Disaster Resilience and our partner organisation AFAC. And my title is Deputy Director of Resilience and Risk Reduction. And I do a lot of the strategic thinking and lead the collaborative work in that space around climate and disasters, public information and warnings, and do a lot of work in the community safety space. So as you can imagine, it's a pretty broad remit that I work with, and I'm lucky to work with a whole range of really exceptional kind of stakeholders and leading thinkers in the space. And I'm a big fan of the work that Nicola does with NHRA as well.
Thanks, Caitlin. That's very generous of you. Appreciate that. All right. I don't think we've got any intros coming in the chat. Please pop your name in and introduce yourselves to the other folk that are with us this morning. You'll also see, hopefully, up the top of the chat, I've also put a link in there that's will take you straight to the relevant webpage for this project, where you will also be able to access the associated documentation. There's a full copy of the expression of interest. There's also a copy of the submission form, and there's also a link to a copy of our current contract form as well. So you'll need access to all of those documents if you're thinking of putting together a submission. Just a little bit about Natural Hazards Research Australia, for those of you who don't know too much about us already. We commenced operating in July 2021 with a one-off bespoke grant from the Commonwealth Government that basically provides funding of 85 million over 10 years. And this is augmented via partner contributions from a lot of the emergency services agencies across the country, as well as supporting contributions of in-kind from some NGOs and other entities as well. And the core objectives of the centre are to really protect human life and minimise harm and suffering, to contribute to developing and supporting well-prepared and resilient communities, and to invest in research that translates into action. And that's essentially what this project's about, is some further work so that this material is easily utilised by the sector and by others as well. Just a little bit about the AFAC National Climate Change Group. This project was recommended to NHRA by this group, and this group was the group that worked with researchers in the very beginning on the former project. So it's convened by AFAC, and it's comprised of key individuals from jurisdictional emergency management agencies, the Bureau of Meteorology, and leading research centres. And the group is tasked with producing a body of work to strategically support effective climate change, risk mitigation, planning and adaptation outcomes for AFAC members, their stakeholders and the community. And if any of you have got any questions about this group, Caitlin plays a key role in supporting this group and can address any queries that you might have about the climate change group. And Matt's a key member of the group, as am I. We're going to go into a little bit more detail about the project now. We're going to talk briefly about the current project's details and its background, where the existing resources came from and how they've been applied so far, and also the need for this further piece of utilisation work. So essentially, this project's a joint project with the AFAC Climate Change Group, and it's working to further develop the translation, utilisation and application of the existing transformative scenarios in a climate challenged world within a needs-based approach. It's going to be informed by a project reference group comprised of key individuals from jurisdictional emergency management agencies, the Bureau of Meteorology, and other leaders in the climate and disaster field and other relevant sectors. The project will have a reference, the reference group will provide an important advisory and testing role throughout the project. The existing transformative scenarios in a climate challenged world resources were designed with and for emergency services to test their existing strategies and practices against a set of plausible futures that we're likely to see between now and 2035. And the former research team, that was made up of RIOS and RMIT, worked with the Climate Change Group to develop 4 distinct and plausible scenarios for what Australia and New Zealand might look like in 2035. And these scenarios are based on the scientific consensus that there will be a continuation of existing climate trends and an increase in volatility, frequency and magnitude of weather extremes. We strongly recommend that you visit the webpage on this slide, where you'll find a short 7-minute video that provides an overview of the current resources and how they can be applied. And it also provides links to all of the material that's currently available. And I might hand over to Caitlin now to talk a little bit more about the previous work that's been done and why they came up with the approach that they've got. Caitlin, are you happy to speak to this slide?
Absolutely. And I can speak quite candidly to this project and with great enthusiasm and passion. It was a project that was undertaken by an exceptional group of strategic thinkers and leaders in across the fire and emergency services sector, and led by some really great consultants. Rios Consulting, who are an international consulting firm who kind of specialise in this transformative scenarios approach, and also some exceptional researchers from RMIT. So that was Lauren Rickards and Adriana Keating, who both now work at different institutions, but at the time both with RMIT. And we knew that, there's a really kind of solid set of climate change scenarios already, that can be used. And there's, climate change projection work kind of happening in a range of different settings. But what we know is that, transformative scenarios and developing scenarios that enable, leaders and agencies and organisations to really test their thinking and their strategies and their plans for the future need to kind of bring together the social, the geopolitical, the uncertainties around the future worlds that we'll actually be living in, just to, to test whether their scenario, their resources, their strategies, their kind of way of doing things kind of hold up in these future worlds with that overlay of, climate change, which we know is on a fixed trajectory, but there's a whole range of uncertainties around how that will actually play out as well. So we were led through a really solid team of, these leaders from the sector came together, and we were led through a really immersive workshop style process. I think it was over about a year, to develop this set of transformative scenarios. And we went through a process of really exploring what, the key driving forces that impact our lives, and then, drilling it down to impacting our work and our sector and our ability to do what we do into the future. And we determined that two of those really key driving forces were the approach to governance, whether that's long-term thinking and strategic decision-making governance approaches, or whether it was, short-term kind of thinking and reactive approaches to governance. And the other really key driving force we determined was that the level of social cohesion in our societies also really has a great impact on the ability of our agencies to kind of do their work really well into the future. So at the end of the day, we sort of developed and mapped out the narratives, as you can see on the screen here, these kind of future worlds, and these 4 future worlds in these 4 quadrants, as you can see. And they're not just, off the chart sort of scenarios. They're really plausible and distinct scenarios. And as you can see, we've given them, each scenario has been given a title, and each scenario was developed, seeded by what's sort of happening in the world at the moment, and what it could look like if a whole bunch of factors kind of took shape and kind of led to these future worlds. So you can see up in the, the top right-hand corner, it's, kind of the utopian version of what the world could be, where, there's, collaborative governance, and, there's a really strong level of social cohesion. And on the opposite end of the spectrum, in the bottom right, the circling the wagons future is one where, there's ecological destruction. It's kind of every man for himself. Up in the top left corner, it's sort of, we get a little bit sci-fi, and it's actually not too far from where we could think that we're actually going with the advent of AI and, the tech-driven future. And the one in the bottom right is kind of somewhere in the middle, where we kind of, fill the void by doing what we need to do to make good decisions, and just to kind of, forge ahead. So these are the 4 worlds that that were the result of, that really hard work that we put in to kind of develop the scenarios, and a set of resources that can be used by, the emergency sector and agencies across Australia. And after that really intense, year of work, we developed a whole suite of resources. And as Nicola said, they all sit very nicely on the NHRA website. So there's a guide to how you can use the scenarios. There's a set of case studies that demonstrate, worked through examples of the wind tunnelling method that's really key to the transformative scenarios approach. There's a really, really valuable kind of environmental scan or literature review that our colleagues from RMIT University undertook, which is cutting edge. There's not a lot of kind of academic rigorous research undertaken into the impact of climate change on this sector. So this is quite a, important piece of work in itself. There's also, as you can see on this slide, the climate hazard event map, which can be used as part of the scenario process to kind of develop your scenarios and tailor kind of future, climate informed disasters for a specific agency or for a specific jurisdiction. Noting that across Australia, people and organisations and agencies will experience, climate and disaster risk in very different ways. So there's this really solid set of scenarios that already exist. And my incredible colleague here from QFES, Matt Dyer, who's a real champion of this work, kind of took it upon himself as the golden child of this work to really test how these kind of resources could work in practice. The problem that we found, though, and we'll probably address this later, so I'll pass back to you, Nicola, but these are the resources that we have at the moment.
Good on you, Caitlin. And it would be really lovely, Matt, if you would like to share about how you've applied them within your agency so far.
You bet, Cola. Thanks, Caitlin. So I was a part of that team that put together those scenarios, and how prescient was the unexpected hero with the emergence of AI over the last 12 months, generative AI especially, I'm talking about. How good was that team? So we come out of that work, and we were looking at an interesting world here at QFES. We had released in late 2018 our long-term strategy, which we called Strategy 2030. And pretty much 12 months later, we're in the middle of the pandemic kicked off. We look again now, and we've had a significant reform released in Queensland for the disaster management arrangements, which really affects Queensland fire and emergency services. And there's a couple of wars on the go. And of course, our part of the world and many parts of Australia in the time since we released our long-term strategy, 2019, had a bunch more disasters. Disasters just don't stop. So given all that, we figured it's probably a good time to think about our long-term strategy here at QFES. So coming just out of the work, developing these transformative scenarios, it was the perfect opportunity to put in play those transformative scenarios. So we undertook a process which we coined the term rapid strategy assessment, which is a play on words from rapid damage assessment, which we often do in disaster management when things go bad. What it meant was the tools that we already have, the tools that you could already find on that NHRA website, made a lot of difference to our strategy work. We could apply them, and we found we could easily modify them. But it did take a full-time FTE, someone like me, to get it through. And I had to have the backing of a boss that said, Matty, you can go and do this work. Can you fit it in with everything else that we've got on the go? Then I had that support. But I know a lot of jurisdictions haven't had that opportunity. And so I was blessed in that regard, and fortunate to have that leadership. So the way we made it work here, we took the resources, we modified them in the ways that worked for us. So we had that slide there a little bit before, which had some sort of climate scenarios. Now we call that what might be in our rear view mirror from a climate perspective, a series of disasters. So we just modified that to suit Queensland. Wanted to project it out to the 2030s. That's easily done because we have a whole bunch of climate modeling that we could easily imagine what those climate scenarios would look like. What's more difficult, of course, for our senior leaders is to imagine the socio-geopolitical tensions, all that stuff that the scenarios cover off on. So what we found is the scenarios did indeed provide an opportunity for our senior leadership team that worked with me on our rapid strategy assessment to actually inhabit those 4 scenarios that we talked about there. Actually, and there's a whole bunch of material that drills down a bit more on what those scenarios look like. So there's not a lot of extra work needs to be done there. The hard work has been done by the collective of jurisdictions across Australia, but applying them is where the difficulty was. But they most assuredly give opportunity for decision makers to inhabit those scenarios. That's really important. A lot of our leaders don't get permission to science fiction the heck out of stuff. And a little bit, that's what we are doing here. We're imagining the 2030s. In our scenario, our rapid strategy assessment was for the 2030s. So inhabiting those scenarios, these tools gave us that. So that was the rapid strategy assessment. Now, with this reform work I mentioned, we also need to build new strategy. The Queensland Fire and Emergency Services will transition to a Queensland Fire Department. So we need new vision, new purpose, new long-term strategic objectives. So we've actually picked that same set of tools on the NHRA website and modified them again, this time to work with our Board of Management. So that's our commissioner, our handful of deputy commissioners. Again, that wind tunneling approach, we got them together on multiple iterations starting in December through January and February. That's actually a key point. Again, we're talking about a group of senior leaders that you just don't have a lot of time with. So the resources always need to be geared to the fact that these people are flat out. They will be managing usually a bunch of things, especially if we start doing these things in the middle of a wet season or a fire season. And look, the last thing I'll say about all this is, I'm sure you know this better than me, but this has always got to be engaging for these people that think in a certain sort of way, these sort of practical, operationally focused people. Even if they're strategic thinkers in our organizations, they will skew towards the operational, especially in season. So it's always got to entertain people. That's always in my mind. Here we are now, entertain us. When I've got a gang together, that's what I'm thinking. And that's Kurt Cobain, a great lyric from Smells Like Teen Spirit. When you can bring all that together, the tools are awesome and wonderfully modifiable. And I think the opportunity is just there to make them even easier for some other version of a larrikin like me in an organization, an emergency service organization, to make it a more plug and play opportunity. If that larrikin, those organizations, doesn't have the backing of the bosses to say, Matty or person, put that time and effort into it. So Nicola and Caitlin, that's kind of where I think the transformative scenarios needs to go. That plug and play, an average person with average amount of time can just pick it up and say, bosses, we're a strategic thinking organization. We're going to do this work. Here's how we're going to get it done.
Yeah, beautifully articulated, Matt. Thank you. That's awesome. But Caitlin, I think I was going to ask if you'd like to speak to this slide in terms of why Matt's touched on it. Yeah, but some of the broader issues as to why we want to develop further utilisation of these resources.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think Matt sort of captured it really neatly in a nutshell. But from my perspective, unfortunately, we can't clone Matt Dyer for every organisation and every jurisdiction around Australia, although we would love to do that. And maybe AI will make that possible sometime down the future, Matt, which I'm sure you'll love. But ultimately, what we really long for is to be able to drill down a really solid set of existing resources into a really sort of accessible, user-friendly, relevant, set of resources that can be applied, in the first instance throughout, emergency agencies in Australia, because we know these agencies are often on the front line of responding to the impacts of climate and disaster risk. They hold a lot of the risk, and they do need these sorts of tools to help them do that strategic thinking. And as Matt was saying, they're busy, boots on the ground, practical people who also have to do this strategic thinking as well. And anything that we can offer them to kind of make this process more efficient and accessible, I think is just going to have, make the world of difference. So I think that's ultimately what it comes down to. And I suppose, at the moment, those resources, require someone like Matt, who kind of has that background in behavioural, thinking, and that really kind of high-level strategic thinking kind of mind to interpret them for that practical application. So I think the other thing that we would really love for the future of these projects is to really take a set of organisations along with us for the journey as we develop them, so they can really, help us refine what works, what doesn't work, and really test, the kind of, the resources and the outputs that we develop. And so we can kind of modify them as we go. So we, hit the sweet spot, because there's kind of great potential for these to really go a long way. We don't want them to just either sit on a website, get a couple of views a year, or sit on, someone's bookshelf. We want them to be used. We want them to be applied. I think there's just such great strength and potential in this kind of scenario approach.
Yeah.
So that's my 10 cents worth there, Nicola.
That's a brilliant 10 cents worth. Thanks, Caitlin. So the way we've thought about this is to actually use a needs-based approach. So we've got an incremental and a staged approach to the project, starting off with a bit of an initial stakeholder needs analysis, because I think what we might find through this project is that different agencies will have different contexts, that will have different opportunities and barriers in terms of applying these resources. So it'd be good to get the required detail on that, so that information can then be used to actually co-design utilisation, application pathways, and the appropriate design and development of the required resources. And then, as Caitlin said, test some of them with a small number of case studies, and then use the evaluation of that process to then inform a standardised approach with a standardised set of resources to be developed that also enables, a more tailored approach as well. So that's the approach. But the additional part in stage 4 is also working with that project reference group to develop up a communications plan and an application plan, really, so that we're using the project as a way of driving that enthusiasm and capturing it with a bit of action at the end, so that entities can actually put in that plan when they're going to apply these resources and how they're going to apply them. So we've got a bit of an implementation plan at the end of the process. I'll just stop there because we're about to get into expected outputs and others, but I just wondered whether anybody's got any questions that you would like to ask Matt or Caitlin or myself. Let's go on to expected outputs. So you will find in the expression of interest form that these are the key outputs that we're looking at with this project. So we want the needs analysis. We also want the development of a range of contextually based resources to support the application of the existing resources across a range of sectors. So we want to focus in on the emergency services sectors first, but we also want to bring along some key external sectors as well for the journey. Yep. And then a bit of that co-design cross-sector multi-jurisdictional communications plan as well. Now, because the needs analysis isn't done yet, we've left it open as to what form these resources could take. So you can see there's some dot points there. They could be online professional development modules, a train the trainer toolkit, a set of further online knowledge resources, or a mix of all of those. It will really depend on what the needs analysis comes up with. We also are looking for recommended utilisation pathways. We are looking for an evaluation of the stage 2 case studies and perhaps some guidelines for the application of the resources, and stakeholder presentations and any other innovative outputs that your team would like to deliver that address the outcomes within the EOI. There's some standard outputs that we have for all of our projects that are also part of this one, which is a project plan and a plain language statement. We require quarterly progress reports, a project evaluation report at the end, and relevant communications outputs as well. For the budget and the timeframe, you'll note that we haven't specified a budget for this project intentionally, but we request that applicants propose a budget for what you think the project requires to meet the outcomes, but also note that this process is a competitive process, so you need to consider the value for money criteria when you propose your budget. We have put a cap on the budget allocation for the development of the resources, and we've capped that at $80,000. So that gives you some level of guidance as to what we expect expenditure on that part of the project. All of our projects have set governance and reporting requirements. So we need to have one lead research entity for contracting purposes. So if you're looking at doing a consortium or a collaborative submission, you'll need a lead entity as part of that process. The contract will be with Natural Hazards Research Australia, and it will be governed by a project management committee, which includes someone from the centre, the lead researcher, and someone from the end user group. And that's a governance-focused committee. It will also be informed by the project reference group that we've spoken about as well, and there'll be regular meetings held with both of those groups. For reporting, we need the project plan, we need milestone delivery and quarterly progress reports and a project evaluation report and stakeholder presentations. Our progress reporting now is all online as well, so the successful team will be provided with some training on how to use our online project management system. You'll find the project details and the expression of interest information, all on our website. And I've given you a link at the very beginning of the chat to this page. You'll also see on that page there's a range of frequently asked questions that would be really good for you to look through, because they answer some of the issues that come up quite often. If you have any further questions, though, you're welcome to email them through to research@naturalhazards.com.au, and we'll address them. We usually, if we address new questions, we usually then insert them as an additional FAQ on the webpage so that everybody has access to that information. And as you can see here, the EOIs have got to be prepared using our submission form and have to be submitted by 5 p.m. AEDT, which is daylight savings time, which means that it's 4 p.m. for those of us in Queensland on Friday, the 5th of December. These are some details in terms of, you'll find all of this information in the expression of interest form, but this provides the key requirements that need to be included within a project submission. And one of the key things, or a new thing that we've included here, is we've also asked for you to indicate any requested changes to our proposed form of contract. And you'll find a copy of our proposed form of contract on the same web page as the EOI. So there's a fair bit of detail there, but that provides us with the necessary information to then assess all of the submissions against these evaluation criteria. So we'll be looking at research capability, the approach that you're taking to the project, the proposed outcomes and the industry engagement, not only for the project, but for work that you've done in the past as well, and looking at the value for money component as well. So they're the evaluation criteria. They too are included in the EOI form. And that is the end of the prepared slides. Thank you, everyone. Friday the 15th of December is the published date. Did I use the wrong date, Lena? My apologies, everyone. Lena is correct. I had a typo in the slides. Thank you for Liza, thank you for pulling that up. It is definitely December the 15th. My apologies, everyone. If you have a look at the EOI yourself, though, you'll see that there are links all the way through the beginnings of the EOI that link you to all of the existing resources that Caitlin and Matt spoke to, and also to the video that we spoke about as well. Do we have any other questions? Liza, you've taken yourself off mute. Did you have a question? Jump in.
I do, and thanks for the presentation, and it does sound like some very exciting work. And I'm not sure if QFES and Matt, you're the only agency that's had the opportunity to really explore and use the tools. But in terms of the suggested outputs for the project, there's a really wide range of options, which may be difficult to cost before the successful bidder explores what some of the challenges are with using the tools as they currently exist. So how would you recommend people respond, taking that into that there may be some flex or movement required in what the form of the outputs actually might look like?
So I suppose we put the budget cap on there, Liza, to help that. Yep. So so that you don't go way too far. Yep. So we put a budget cap of 80,000 for the resources. Yep. To try and help bound that part of the project. I wonder, Caitlin, did you want to speak to a little bit about why perhaps some of the agencies are struggling with the current resources? And that might help the folk that are online think about what sort of outputs might help.
Yeah, so the current resources kind of sit there as fairly academic kind of outputs. As you can imagine, in busy kind of agency settings, people need things that are kind of ready to go, that are just tailor-made, that they can pick up and kind of work with. So they're incredible, complex, detailed, outputs, but they're in quite a raw academic form at the moment, and they really need to be synthesized so that they can be user-friendly, practical, attractive, like Matt said, you know, so they've got that kind of wow factor, that kind of X factor, the fun factor that means that people can pick them up and make sense of them really quickly without having to trawl through, you know, pages and pages and pages and thousands of words of detail. I really think that's kind of what lies at the heart of this. It's just translating this really important but really high level knowledge into really user-friendly, accessible kind of resources. I can't say what they should look like because I'm not a specialist in, you know, L&D and kind of making things look snazzy on a website or whatever, but I just know that that's what will really help.
Does that help, Liza?
Yes, it does. Thank you.
It's a bit of an unknown because it really depends on what comes out of the needs assessment as well. Yeah, I think you might find there might be some contextual issues too at play that, yeah, I'm not sure whether, yeah, it'll be interesting to see how the team ends up tackling some of those issues. Yeah. One of the other things that Caitlin spoke about in the early stages of us developing this project is that the train the trainer option or model might be worth looking at as well, depending on what comes out of the needs analysis. And Caitlin, you drew an interesting comparison with the community recovery handbook. Did you want to speak to that at all?
Yeah, so my colleagues at ADA managed the development of the Disaster Resilience Handbook collection. And recently we worked with our partners in the government through the NEMA, the National Emergency Management Agency, to develop like a companion toolkit to the recovery handbook, which is kind of seen in the field as like the Bible to recovery. You know, it's huge. And, you know, recovery is a really nuanced and kind of really important part of, you know, the disaster management spectrum. And so we developed a recovery exercising toolkit, and it kind of takes that train the trainer approach and kind of works through a whole series of modules that, you know, local emergency management committees can use to kind of work through what the key issues are, around, you know, the basics kind of 101 of recovery and the range of issues that you need to consider to kind of enter the recovery process in a really effective and meaningful way. So it kind of has particular modules on, you know, working with First Nations communities, you know, working with people with particular needs, the economic kind of dimensions of recovery, you know, things about, you know, the importance of sense of place in a recovery context. And it just means that, you know, you don't need someone like Matt or me to kind of be there in your organisation, in your emergency management committee to kind of teach you this. It's kind of set up in that train the trainer way that, you know, you could have a couple of people kind of, you know, take it upon them, like it's their task in their position to kind of do this kind of you know, there's kind of the train the trainer resource as well that kind of steps people through how you would use these modules so that they can kind of share it with their organisation. And it seems to be a really kind of effective, you know, tool for that environment.
So that's a potential model that we're familiar with. Well, Caitlin's familiar with. I'm not really that familiar with it, but it gives a bit of an idea of a possible set of outcomes, Liza.
Yeah,
Do we have
great.
any other questions or comments? Any questions about a consortium approach, or whether you would want to join up with anybody else in putting together a submission, or you feel that you'd like to just jump in and go for it? This is a really important piece of work because it helps strengthen the strategic vision and its application as we go into this future world, I think, and it's got value way beyond the emergency management sector as well, that would contribute to community disaster resilience and risk reduction. So it's an innovative approach, and it's pretty exciting. When you have a look at the material that already exists, it's really, really exciting. Good on you, Caitlin. Caitlin's just put a link to that recovery exercising toolkit for you in there as well. We look forward to receiving a submission from each one of you, at least. hopefully some more for those who couldn't join us today as well. And we wish you all a really good day. Thank you.